Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about What If Season 2, Episode 8. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up with Peggy's story in 1602. Obviously she's been here for a couple weeks. Obviously we get thrown into the mix of things. You have Loki on stage doing Shakespeare and just Thor calling him out, which is, I can only assume that's supposed to be a little bit of an acknowledgement, kind of a, because it's like, right, the era's being put together. I kept referring to it as medieval times. I couldn't really put it into words what time frame it was, but it was like, well, Shakespearean time is more appropriate, like overarching era to kind of describe it as. But I'm sure that's supposed to almost be a little bit of a play on every Thor movie having like those little plays. There wasn't no, Ragnarok was the first one to have one, and then they brought it back in Love and Thunder, but I figure it's supposed to be kind of almost a play into that a little bit too. But it's so interesting. I just brought it up last episode about like, oh man, Hela, Loki, and Thor never really getting time to be siblings because they were at each other's throats during Ragnarok. But in this world, it's kind of like, oh, they kind of did. They kind of got to have that sibling stuff because it's like Odin's not on the throne. In fact, it's Hela. I mean, it makes sense. She's the oldest. But I thought that was just kind of nice. Just like I said, just because I talked about that last episode, so it's kind of funny. But sadly, the rifts are getting worse, and Peggy was able to save Loki, but not Hela, and Thor blames her for it. It's like, right, you were sent here to save us, but in fact, it's weeks have gone by and you haven't been able to do anything. And so he takes all that frustration now. It's like, right, my sister's gone now, and it's like, right, you're a king. I mean, it plays, as even the Watcher says, it plays into like the Shakespearean thing of, a king who is burdened by loss, a soldier on the run. But it's like, yeah, it's just like Thor just consumed by his anger. Like, he's not thinking rationally. He doesn't always, he can be very thick-headed and pig-headed sometimes. So he's not listening to Carter when she's like, right, let me have an opportunity to like try and fix this. But he doesn't want to listen because he's too angry and sad about losing his sister. He's like, right, she's dead now. So, but Peggy's on the run, and I love that the Watchers there be like, yeah, he even says what I thought was so interesting, where he was like, some universes are doomed to die, which I think is kind of an interesting parallel, just because at the end of the episode, who shows up? Doctor Strange. He destroyed his own universe, but it's like, for him, it's like, he has a job of not directly interfering, even though he kind of broke that rule, broke his oath last season, but he's trying to keep it up as much as possible. But it's a situation of some universes are just destined to die, which is just kind of the sad thing. I feel like it almost parallels the whole thing in Loki of how Sylvie hid. She hid in apocalypses, so where it's like there's no changing this, So it almost feels like there's a parallel there. But I love that the Watcher's like, oh, she's all alone. She failed. She's like, I can hear you. He's like, wait, you can? She's like, yeah, sometimes I can. And he's like, right, you can't save this world, Peggy. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, I can like take you home, like you, because later on he says like, even if you resolve this whole situation, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get back home. It doesn't mean like everything's going to be fixed and okay. But for Peggy, it's like, no, like I still gotta try. It's like, it's that cap in everybody, whether it's Peggy, whether it's Steve. I think even with Sam, it's just whoever takes up that mantle. They always got to do right, And so Peggy wants to see this through, and so she goes to visit Tony. And I love that he's talking about, like, oh, tell me those words again. And it's like, oh, flux capacitor. And later on, he's like, oh my god, like you and your made up gibberish. Oh, it's like opium to my ears. But yeah, Peggy ends up getting Tony's help because it's like, well, you're the one that can help me. No arc, because the word she said was like, oh, there's no arc reactor here, because he's trying to build something that could help find, because Wanda figures that the person responsible for all this is a time traveler from the future who doesn't even realize their presence here is basically unraveling time, because the Watcher was like, oh, you don't even understand what's going on here. And Peggy's like, let me guess, 1602 and the 21st century are basically clashing together, and that's kind of basically the state of this world, and it's in the long run with this person from the future, it's kind of make it come unraveled. It kind of reminds me of like the season 2 finale of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, where basically all of time is kind of collapsing upon itself, like everything from all over time is coming into present day. It kind of reminds me a little bit of that. I don't know if that's the basis for the actual comic itself, or is it just kind of like its own universe that I'd assume that's still the heart of it. If like, no, like everyone just, I haven't read it. I only know of its existence. I have never read it, so I don't know if it's a thing in the comic where they're aware that they're in 1602, because I was under the impression like they were unaware. It's just like this is this world and they're not aware of like, oh, this is a clashing of like different time frames stuck together. I was like, I just assumed that's just the way the world was, and that was just their reality. For most people it is, except for Peggy. Peggy's the only one that sees this world for what it really, really is, the culmination of other timelines and stuff put together. But either way, it is kind of sly that we ultimately find out that Fury and Wanda, well, I mean, they were the ones that worked together to bring Peggy here, that they would be on the, like, right, working with Thor, but also against him, because it's like, you're so thick-headed, you're not thinking this through. Peggy's our only hope of stopping all of this. And so Peggy's going to need something powerful like Thor's, the scepter, which has, interestingly enough, which I wonder if there was some significance to it, because typically what's at the center of that staff is the Tesseract, but in this particular situation, it's the Time Stone. So you're like, why is that? Which one is the Tesseract again? Is that like the Power Stone? It's the Space Stone, obviously. I feel so stupid for not realizing that. Either way, but it's like in this particular universe, it's in the Time Stone, which I almost feel like it's a parallel to, at least in the MCU timeline, I mean, in the MCU continuity, the Eye of Agamotto, I don't, probably butchering that, its main purpose is to house the Time Stone, so it's interesting that it would be in the staff, which we'll get into that as we kind of progress through the story. But she's going to need a thief's help, and lo and behold, who does she turn to? Steve, who's basically, I don't know if he's full-blown Robin Hood in this universe. It makes sense that he would be, you know, the charming, suave, take from the rich, give to the poor type of situation, but he might just be a regular thief in this. He might not actually be, but he, you know, he might not be a full Robin Hood, but he's probably like an honorable thief regardless. So, and I love that Loki was like, yeah, oh, like, you know, Shakespeare's working on this new play. It's about this guy Iago. I mean, really, there's other characters, but it's really all about Iago. Obviously, me being who I am, the only Iago I know is Iago from Aladdin. I'm sure maybe there's deeper parallels you could make, but I had to look it up. Iago's from the play Othello. I don't know Othello. I know bits and pieces, but very little, but he's the main antagonist, and a lot of the parallels when I was hearing about who Iago was, I was like, oh, of course Loki be like, no, he's the main character. It's really about him. It's his story. It's like, of course, you know, because I'm sure I'm sure Iago was also burdened with glorious purpose, Loki. But either way, because I'm not well versed in a lot of Shakespeare. Like, obviously, the one I know best is Romeo and Juliet. I think most people know Romeo and Juliet that well. I know a little, like, the most minimal amount of Hamlet, and maybe Macbeth. I know, like, a minimum amount, but, like, it's a 100%, like, Romeo and Juliet. It's a classic. Obviously, they're all classics, but, like, Romeo and Juliet, it's just probably, like, the story I've always, as a hopeless romantic, I've always, like, it's sad as shit, but it's still just a very sad and beautiful yet tragic tale. But either way, I love that his band of thieves, I was curious who's going to be amongst them. The only main people we know is Bucky and Scott, which makes a lot of sense. Scott's a thief and everything too, so, you know, and obviously, like, Scott's the biggest, you know, Captain America fanboy, so it's like, of course he'd be like, you know, happy to be a part of this. And obviously it's kind of nice to know, like, hey, Bucky, it's always nice Bucky and Steve are able to, like, be best buds and comrades in the universe. But him and Peggy meet, and it's like, whoa, my Margaret died. I was like, oh, because the moment he said that, I was like, Jesus, does nothing work out for these two? These two are star-crossed lovers almost across the entire multiverse. I'm like, we know one time it's worked out, but even that was a whole thing in itself to get them together by Endgame. But you're like, jeez, man, that's sad as shit. Like, I mean, some universes out there other than the MCU's main timeline has got to work out. But that's probably the irony behind it. It might just be the only universe where it works out. I mean, she comes from a universe where it didn't work out because Steve became essentially the Winter Soldier in her universe. Obviously, they were still separated by time and brought together, sure, but it didn't work out even present day in the MCU, you know, aside from the Endgame stuff. Like, so it's just sad the moment you hear that. It's like, oh, they were together, but she died. I'm like, Jesus Christ, bro. That sucks. But she needs his help. And he's like, oh, so is there a Steve Rogers from your universe? She's like, yeah. It's like, what was he like? Tell me about it. And it's like, I don't think I will. I was like, if I haven't seen Endgame since 2019, but if I remember correctly, isn't that what Steve told Sam? That he was like, no, I don't think I will. I was like, that's nice bringing that in back like that, because for him it's like, oh, any normal person would probably like, being so far from home, being in another world, different time, like it'd be a lot. And for Peggy, it's like, yeah, being in the wrong place and wrong time ends up being kind of my thing. It's like, it ends up being a lot of Cap's thing, sadly. But she might not be his Peggy, but at the end of the day, it's like, you are a Peggy, and it's like, my Peg would want me to help you do the right thing. So yeah, I'm here to help steal the scepter from Thor. And I love that they have an army of assassins who are basically yellow jackets. I love that. And it's Scott being like, shrinking's my thing. I hate copycats. Which I thought that was hilarious. That they would make really interesting assassins. They would make the perfect assassin squad. So I love that whole sequence of just everyone. And they're also like, right, try not to piss off Happy because he's the freak in this universe. So that's because we don't know what universe this is, like the 1602 universe. So it's interesting that it would pull from a universe where Happy happens to be the freak as well. So that's interesting. So there's at least probably a few universes out there where he is the freak. This isn't just like episode 3. This isn't 3's universe sided with this one. I think it's just a different universe in general. I also love when Peggy brought up the fact is like, oh yeah, like you, me, and Tony are friends. He's like, really? Me being friends with that douchebag? That's my words. It's me paraphrasing. But it's like, he's like, I'd love to see that, because he could not fathom it. But the whole, like, he has to kind of keep himself under control because of his ailment, because I'm so stupid. Like, Hulk hulks out. Does that mean Happy freaks out? Why didn't I think about that in episode 3? I feel so stupid. That's super obvious. It's right there. How did I not think about that? Happy freaks out. God, I feel so stupid. Either way, but I love that little action sequence, and I also love that because Peggy and Natasha had this moment during season 1's finale against Ultron where they were like bouncing like they were kind of working in tandem. But I like that we kind of get a little bit of like Peggy and Steve with like the shield bouncing between them. I'm like, dude, that's sick. That's amazing. I was like, that's super dope. It's really kind of cute and sweet getting to see them like fight together in that capacity, because obviously we kind of got it in episode 5, but he's in the Hydra Stomper, so it's a little different. But Peg gave them an opportunity to get away, and once again, the Watcher's like, right, Peggy, this world's going to meet its end, and you don't have to be here. But for Peggy, it's like, I have to try. And he's like, because you're human. And she's like, no, because I'm me. Because he was saying, at the end of the day, he's like, as an omnipotent being who kind of sees like everything, you don't know the consequences of your actions. Like, you don't know what the end result will be in this, but Peggy's willing to try anyway because there are lives at stake here. And it's like, I was brought here to do a job, and I'm going to see it through because it's the right thing to do. So she ends up busting Banner out, which he keeps himself locked up because it's like, right, I want to get away from any triggers or anything. But it's so neat seeing him with like the beard and the long hair as the Hulk. Well, because doesn't he have a similar, it's not the same, but I think he has a slightly similar look in the Logan time frame, like Old Man Logan storyline, because I know he's kind of got gray hair and stuff like that, but I think he has like a gray beard and longish hair in that universe. No, he's bald in that universe, isn't he? Doesn't he just have a beard? Or am I thinking of Mastro? I think I'm thinking of both, but either way, I think it's more like a bald situation, but it is like a gray beard, I think, in both capacities. But either way, tangents and all that aside, him kind of going on a stampede, and she ends up meeting up with Tony, who's created a machine that it's like, oh yeah, your silence is like, flattering, but I'd also appreciate some appreciation. So the whole squad is together because it's like, right, we have to make this count, like time is of the essence. So they sneak into like this, what was the ceremony for, where it was like a celebration of Thor or whatever, but yeah, a new rift opens up, and this probably would have been the last one to like swallow the entire universe or world. So Wanda's holding it off at the same time that our heroes get put in action. Steve's fighting against Happy. because he accidentally cut his feather and made him turn into the Freak. Bruce is doing his thing, which he was supposed to be the Signal, and he's coming in beating up people, screaming "Signal, Signal!" Someone's like, "Oh, I guess that's the Signal." I also love that Red Skull is there. He's the executioner, interestingly enough, which feels very befitting. I know it's got to be on some level poetic. I mean, obviously Bucky was fighting him for a little bit, but it's kind of very, very poetic, and you're just like, ah, yes. When Steve's the one that ends up knocking him down, it's like, yeah, and like him and Bucky had their moment, and like, yeah, brothers in arms type of situation. I didn't talk about it, but I do like that the shield he has. I don't know if that's meant to be resemblant of his shield in Infinity War, the one he gets from Wakanda. Did he have two, or is it just one? It might just be one. I can't remember. It's been a hot minute. So, but I remember he gets a shield from Wakanda, and it's kind of like that. It's not the circular sign. It's like a pointy shield, kind of like the one he has now. So I wonder if it's supposed to be kind of an homage to that, or what, because it's on the like smaller side, the one he has. We also have Thor, who has a sword called the Allfather, because he gave Loki Mjolnir, but Loki's like, yeah, I kind of lost it. I don't know where it is, which I brought up I thought was interesting. Hela had Mjolnir last episode. Now it's actually Loki's, and he doesn't have it, which I thought was so interesting. But Thor has like a vibranium sword. T'Challa, I guess. It said Wakanda, King of Wakanda, so I'm assuming time frame wise it would be T'Challa had given it to him. And she's just like, and I love Peggy's like, geez, you're more of a drama queen than your brother. And Loki's like, oh, pleased or pleasured or something like that. Oh, like blessings is what he said. And Thor's like, really? That's a low blow, and that's what really pissed him off. So the clashing of them, which didn't it? No, I can't remember. Like, wasn't it? I know they did not get along at first, obviously with the Avengers-esque style, but I'm trying to remember. Was it Tony and Thor that went at it, or was it Cap and Thor that went at it? I don't remember. Which is also a little poetic, considering like they had to work together to defeat Thanos and everything. So, especially because it's like I don't know, just them being on opposite sides like this was kind of interesting. Like I said, I just can't remember who fought in the Avengers against each other. Like I said, I feel like it might have been Tony and Thor, but it might have been Cap and Thor. I just can't. It feels more like a Tony and Thor thing. I don't feel like it would be a Cap and Thor thing, but maybe it was. I don't remember. And in typical hero fashion, it literally comes down to the wire as they get the staff, they put the time stone in the device, but the device isn't working. And Tony's like, hey, it's not a failure if it doesn't explode. It's only a failure if it explodes. So they finally activate it, and it's like, okay, so who's the person from the future? And turns around, it's Steve. And it's like, oh, of course. Because I was like, we hadn't really shown anyone that I'm like, who could it be? Who is it going to be? I mean, we've seen a few characters sprinkled here and there, but you figured it had to be someone from the main cast that we've gotten associated with this story. Of course, it makes sense it's Steve, but I don't know why it didn't even cross my mind to think. I mean, because he's like, oh, because he had a Peggy of his own in this universe, but it's like, oh, right. Because I guess the traveling here made him forget, because he's like, right, I remember now. It turns out he's from Infinity War. I mean, he does have the beard and everything, and I was just talking about the shield and stuff. But yeah, his weapon struck the time stone, and he ended up here. That's how this all started for him, at least, you know? And it's just like Peggy has to send him back to where he belongs, but Peggy's like, I don't want to have to say goodbye. It's like, dude, we never work. Does it ever work out for us? You know? And he says himself, he's like, it's got to work out for us somewhere out there. And it's just like, dude, once again, that's sad. The hero's sacrifice of like, yeah, it's like, you know, at the end of the day, it's kind of like, doesn't Peggy deserve her happy ending? You know, don't they deserve their happy ending? And it's like, we know that they get theirs, but it's still sad knowing that somewhere out there in the multiverse, there's so many Peg and Steves that just don't have their happy ending. Maybe there's a lot more than we know, but I mean, for right now, the only one we know for sure is the MCU main timeline, Peg and Steve. But it's just them kind of having to say goodbye. It's always saying goodbye with them, you know? But there was something, God, what is it? I guess, I mean, there's always, I was about to say, like, there is that, I was about to say, like, being able to saying goodbye means just another opportunity to say hello. And I was like, where am I pulling that from? I'm like, is that WandaVision? It feels like that. I mean, it's very WandaVision-esque in some capacities, but I'm sure it's just like, it's kind of that same tragedy. I mean, obviously, I mean, who knows what WandaVision circumstances are across them. Well, we know to some extent what Wanda's what aspects of like Wanda, like multiverse wise, because of multiverse of madness, but also like, you know, maybe things aren't as tragic in a lot of universes when it comes to her, like it is Steve and Peg, because it seems like we're creeping up on, every universe. It just seems like that does not work out for whatever reason. But now the time has been restored. It's regular 1602. It's not even the present day stuff includes our like heroes, goes back to what it was in this universe. And Peggy's just not only stuck in this universe, she's stuck in 1602. And there was that line. She was like, there's kind of like this saying that basically she, from her days on the battlefield and during World War II, was that basically kind of like being the curse of being a hero, because the further and further you get onto the battlefield, the farther and farther you get away from home. So even that victory is a curse in that regard, because that means you've gone so far to get that victory, but that means it's a long, long way home that you might not even find your way home. And she kind of is stuck there. She thinks the Watcher's coming to like tell her like, hey, you're stuck here. But turns out it's strange. And he's like, oh, Peggy, do I got to tell you? And I'm like, interesting. Because we know he got Coyote 2 episodes ago. So now you're coming to Peggy. What's going on? Like I said, I think this involves Armanzola and Killmonger, where they left off. Kind of, I guess now he's gathering up forces. But why specifically them? Or is this some other tale he's going to tell? It does say to be continued, so we're flowing this into the season finale. I'm so curious to see what that story ends up being. Like I said, I'd assume it revolves around Zola and Killmonger, because I believe I saw them in the trailer and they weren't trapped anymore. Could be mistaken, but why the dimension hopping that he's doing, and the Watcher letting him do it is kind of interesting too. So it's gonna be interesting to see. The next episode, like I said, is the season finale. So I'm so curious to see how this all plays out and where this all goes. We might be leaning towards, because of this setup here, in particular, because of the Steve and Peggy of it all, she might be having her endgame moment next episode too, because it seems like she ends up being, she's the main through line throughout the story beat. I mean, because she is the one we revisited her story, but I mean, we're also, throwing Strange into that mix as well. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that ultimately all comes together and plays out in the season finale. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.